And the reason that even matters to you today is because there's things that God's wanting out of you. And we could talk about love all day long, but love is one of the most unselfish things you can ever give a person. And there's something God's wanting from you that feels very unnatural from you. Just as unnatural as it would be for a mother of a newborn to say, give her to the other woman, but don't let him die. And God's asking you to do something so crazy out of love that it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And then I started thinking about the other woman in the story, because all we think of with her is what kind of evil person would want to kill someone. First of all, would be so unaware of your own newborn you'd roll over on it and kill it. Right? It's like, who would do that? And then to want to kill somebody else's baby just to say, fine, if none of us can have him, then we'll let him be cut in two. And I think about that woman. And this was the next 2x4 that I got hit with. God said, guess what? You're that woman too. Without the grace of God, I would be that woman. Without God's love, I can be pretty dark inside. I don't know if you've ever had some ugly, dark moments with your kids or with your family or with somebody, and the stuff that goes on inside this brain that I have to beat down with a bat is pretty ugly. And as much as you think, oh, that woman that rolled over on her baby and just wanted to let the baby be cut, oh, she's just a nasty person. The Lord said, you could be just as nasty. I've had some dark times with my kids. I've had some days I'm not proud of. Julie and I laugh about it. We had a hair pulling contest one time when she was about 8 years old. She was so bad at Kroger's, so we left the cart in there, and I said, fine, then we're going home, and I don't remember who pulled whose hair first, but we were in a hair pulling match in the car. It was an ugly day. I'm not proud of that. And I would have to say that my poor daughter has seen me uglier and darker than any of my other kids. And I think back to the story of the two women, and I think to the one that was just inexcusable, and the Lord said, we're that close to being that woman. Without God's love working in us, amen, without God's mercy, we are ugly inside. We are capable of some pretty nasty things. And I was asking God, what motivates us to that? And I'm thinking about some of my ugliest times. And I'm thinking back to the day in the hospital when Marley was not being cared for very well. And I was angry. And I think sometimes when we're ugly with someone we love, it's because we're scared. And we're angry. And so I think back to some times that were just so ugly. And I was not the person that I wanted to be, and I was not the person showing them Christ, I can tell you that. When my kids needed Christ, they got this ugly mother that would say nasty things and criticize. I'm good at that one. I'm good at criticizing. And so the Lord showed me this story this week, and I thought, oh, this would just be a nice story about a mother's undying love for her child, and she would give it up to this other woman to keep it alive. And he said, are you willing to do that? And so I'm thankful because, that process, when God asks you to do something that's going to hurt, it'll be worth it in the end, because there's a freedom in that. There's freedom in love that hurts. They say give till it hurts. Sometimes God's going to ask that of you. And you may not be a parent, but there's going to be someone God wants you to love, and it's going to hurt to love them the way God's asking you to love them. Because it ain't easy. And so Solomon gave a wise judgment to these two women. And it's interesting, when God gives wisdom, because I think we could all say that we don't know how to do things very well. But the Bible tells us to ask for wisdom. In James, he says, if any of you is deficient in wisdom, let him ask of the giving God, who gives to everyone liberally and ungrudgingly, without reproaching or fault-finding, and it will be given him. Without fault-finding. So when you screw up as a parent, when you screw up as a wife or a husband, or a son or a daughter, or a brother or a sister or a friend, and you say, God, I don't know how to handle this. How do I lead my children and not criticize? How do I give them freedom and not neglect them? And what is tough love? Because if you're a mom, you just want to give love. And then I think back to 1 Corinthians. Love is patient. Am I patient? Am I kind? Am I quick to forgive, slow to anger? Not always. I need wisdom. So, the Lord hit me hard with that story this week, and I'm thankful. It was interesting last night. We sat down, I was going to watch TV, and the documentary channel came on. I said, what the are we watching the documentary channel for? She goes, well, just wait. Why don't you see what's coming on? Because Bob had evidently looked at the TV guide to see what was coming on.
TV guide?
Well, you know, the guide. You know, it's the TV's guide. It's not in a magazine anymore. So this documentary came on about adoptive kids, adoptive parents, and birth parents. I'm like, oh, okay. And so we watched this documentary of a woman who, back in the day, found herself with a newborn. And back then, there wasn't this open adoption process. And so she essentially, her baby was kind of finagled away from her deceitfully, and she lost her child. And so there was interviews with people that had been given up for adoption, people who adopted, and then people who were the birth parents who never got to see their children. It was amazing. It all came down to the same conclusion, that children need to know where they came from. And that parents who adopt should not be naive to think that their love is enough to cover everything, because it doesn't explain to a child where they came from. And they had some different ethnics and races within families, like the black child adopted by the white parents, or the Japanese little girl that came, or the Chinese girl, and there was problems with that. And so as we were watching that, it showed how when you really love a child, you recognize the need of the child over your need. And what's that have to do with anything? It's sort of like this mother that Solomon had ruled over. And so we had watched that, and Bob and I had kind of tearfully watched through that, and we know now exactly everything that Julie's been wanting to do to find her birth mom, or to reconnect with her. Even though I've known she's lived on Tremainsville, Julie, for years, all you had to do was look in the white pages online. It tells you where she lives and who lives with her, but I wasn't about to tell Julie that. But that's a need. And in the spirit, we have a need to know who we are. And I think a lot of our struggle and a lot of our turmoil is when we don't really know who our daddy is. Like, who's your daddy? That won't joke, okay? You can laugh. Who's your daddy? But God, the Heavenly Father, has paid a price when He gave His Son for our good. He knew willfully He was handing over His Son for us so that He could be our daddy. And He loves us more than we can ever imagine. And if you think of the most unselfish, the most lovely thing you've ever done for your child, and it might be something you're so proud of, and yet God did something even greater. And that's how much He loves you. And so we watch that, we recognize that there's such a longing inside every person to know where they came from. And God's saying, you're mine, and I want you. And when we come home to Christ, and when we receive Him, and we're adopted into His family, there's something that was missing that's filled up. And I pray that each one of you experience that. I want to share, I'm going to move to another story of another mother here. You all have heard me talk about Hannah in 1 Samuel, who, unlike the two prostitutes who found themselves with children that maybe they didn't want or expect, right? So you got two women who just had these babies, one rolls over on her own child and kills it. Let's flip over to a woman who's married and can't have children. Where's her pain? Where's her reliance on God? And so you may very well know the story because as long as you've been coming here, you've heard me preach it. So this woman, Hannah, cries out to God in such a desperate way. She cries out in such a desperate way. So much that the priest thinks she's drunk, laying there on the church steps. And she believes by faith the words that he gives her and says, you're going to have a child. And so we're going to jump way ahead in the story. She's had the child. But she had told the Lord, if you would give me a child, I will give him back to you. Now this just boggles my mind, the way that God is showing us lessons in the Word by people women who actually give their child away. You see why? Because that goes against every piece of human nature we have. I mean, if you know someone who has neglected their child or literally abandoned them, you don't have a lot of respect for them, do you? You're like, how does a woman do that? Right? That's like the unpardonable sin. And yet God is saying that he required that of these two different women as an act of love and an act of faith. And in this situation, Hannah, she had promised God, if you give me a child, I will give him back. Which goes against everything that a woman can do, would be to give her child away. And that's why when people who have a child and they give it up for adoption, that is love in action. That is love in action. And so this woman, she promised God, and she kept her promise. She knew there was nothing she could do with this child that God couldn't do. And this is an amazing story because in the story, it tells us how once he was weaned or old enough to kind of just be raised by someone else, she took him back to the priest, Eli, who was the one that had told her the first time, God's going to answer your prayer. Now here's a man, Eli, he's a priest, he's got 2 sons. And we all know that pastors' kids, they walk straight and narrow and they got it all together. No, these 2 boys were trouble. They were trouble with a capital T. They were awful. Okay, his sons were awful. So what do you do with a guy who can't raise his own sons? You give him your infant, right? But that's what she did. He had 2 sons that were worthless, awful. And yet Hannah had promised God, if you give me a child, I will give him back to you. And that's for a whole other day about why would she do that, you know, what she wanted. She didn't really want the son. She wanted God's presence. She needed to know that she was okay with God. And back in that day, when God blessed you with a child with fruit of your womb, that meant God smiling on you. And so when you didn't have fruit of your womb, you felt like you were cursed. And so she just said, God, just prove to me I'm not cursed. Prove to me that you love me. Because the child that you give me then, so everyone can see that I'm not cursed, I will give him to you because I love you. So she takes him and gives him to Eli to raise. So he's like a preacher's kid now. He's raised in the church. And the story tells us that every year she would make him a new linen coat or ephod. He was like a little miniature Eli. He was a little miniature priest. So like Joshua, like a little miniature Bob. Okay? Yeah. Who is Joshua Samuel, by the way. And this was Samuel. She gave Samuel back to Eli. And so we always can picture her sewing this little coat. Have you ever seen those little bathrobes that they make for little kids, or those little swimming robes? I was going to bring one of those. Just picture one of those. Every year when she would go to the temple, she would take him a new one. That's the only time she saw her son. It was just to take him a new coat. And I'm thinking, how can a woman do that? And it's the love of a mother.